Hello, everybody. You're listening to Chris Hattingh, researcher at the Free Market Foundation. Thank you very much for joining me on this, my latest solo podcast. I've been on a bit of a hiatus with these podcasts, I guess, not a self-chosen hiatus, but just by virtue of how busy we are at the Free Market Foundation. Government tends to keep us very, very busy. As I'm sure you're all aware, government is always trying to increase its control over our lives. There are different forms of this that goes on pretty much every day that we try and keep a handle on and try and counter as best as we can. That's our day job, to sum it up as with as neat a bow as I possibly could. Just so you know, I'm also trying to follow the current semi-final of the Cricket World Cup between New Zealand and India. It's getting very close now, and India need 44 runs from 26 deliveries to win the game. So I apologize in advance if I get distracted at all or scream or anything like that if there's an interruption to your normal service. On this week's episode, I just wanted to touch on a topic that is brought up every now and then when capitalists and socialists, broadly speaking, using those terms, engage with each other, and that is the topic or the issue of exploitation. Yesterday evening, so that's Tuesday evening, a friend of a colleague and friend, I'll call him a friend. He can always dispute this if he so likes, but a colleague and friend of mine, Mpiaki Glamini, I'm sure you've all listened to his podcast as well, read his articles, which you can find on our website. But he and I participated in a debate hosted by Rashu Christie. That's a student organization. It was in Pretoria, very close to the University of Pretoria, and in the debate with us was a representative from the Economic Freedom Fighters. And broadly speaking, the debate was capitalism versus socialism. So all the participants got to lay out their positions. Then the moderator asked us a few questions. I thought it was a really, really good event. So I hope we can do more of it in the future. I like to think Mpiaki and I, presented the case for capitalism as best as we could. The representative from the EFF was, good in his responses. He responded well to things we said. He brought up his own concerns and points, and I think overall it was a good evening. So we look forward very much to continuing this sort of engagement in the future. I think no matter the ideological divide, if we can engage with each other in good faith conversations, more progress can be made than simply throwing slurs and using violence against each other. That's always the sort of debate and engagement we would hope for and encourage. So for us, a very good evening. Now, yesterday evening and a few other times, people bring up people who would consider themselves socialists or on the left. They bring up the issue of exploitation. What would happen to workers if regulation was relaxed or dropped completely? Surely then the workers are going to get exploited more. For them, workers are already exploited now. So that's why government shouldn't be pulled back as much as we free marketeers would like. Now, just with this issue of exploitation, I'd like you to keep in mind, broadly speaking, for me, there's an underlying problem here, which is not a problem, but maybe assumption. Let's say assumption. The broad assumption that I know better for someone what is good for them than they know for themselves. So I might, because I'm a university student, because I have a master's degree in philosophy, I might say, well, I've studied all these ethical theories, so therefore I will automatically know for you what you should do every day with your life, for example, and that puts me in a better position. And I fear that when people with that sort of assumption get into political power, that is where we see the rising of authoritarian regimes, be they racist regimes, colonialist, apartheid, socialist, communist, fascist. All of them, they come with a presumption of intimate knowledge of other people's lives, that we know better how they should live, that we should guide their decisions, we should make their decisions for them, we should either guide them very actively or at least interfere with other people in the market so that those people aren't exploited. Now, to me, that view removes a lot of agency from individual workers' lives. It presumes that they are always at the mercy of big business or whichever other devil you want to paint. It's a sort of caricature of business. Now, if you can manage to let that assumption go, then you'll see for workers, no matter what position they're coming from, they always can offer labor, time, skills, and expertise. We're all different and can offer different things. Now, when I come to the table to negotiate a contract with a business, I come with certain expectations and needs. And if that business doesn't, or that potential employer doesn't fulfill what I think he should, or he or she should, then I should hold them accountable. And in a competitive market, I'll be able to move to a different employer. It is not exploitation for me if I voluntarily decide to enter a contract. Now, for us looking in from the outside, we could very much assume that that person is getting paid, I don't know, 1,000 rand, and that's clear exploitation. But it is not up to us to decide for other people what is exploitation in their own lives. That is their own decision and ability and responsibility and choice to make. And it adds an element of dignity to their lives to allow them to own their own lives and their own decisions, to not have government bureaucrats decide for them what exploitation might be. Exploitation for me might not be exploitation for someone else, and I shouldn't place that person in my position just because I think I know better. Now, I realize that this might be, maybe a bit of a scary thought. Surely businesses will try and get labor for the least cost as possible. Now, some businesses might well do that, and if the media and employees in that business want to put pressure on them in a free market with free speech, they're able to do so very strongly. If a business engages in business practices that aren't considered ethical, the society will put pressure on that business and hopefully ostracize that business, and they'll go out of business. It's not in their interest to exploit their workers, as simple as that. Now, in South Africa currently, we have so many regulations that employers are, they're discouraged from employing more and more people. The cost of labor is artificially inflated by government interfering in the economy. For example, through the national minimum wage, which raises the price of labor, and in turn that price is passed on to the business, which is passed on to the consumer, if indeed they keep on employing people. But it simply discourages them from employing people. As much as we might not like the profit motive, for some of you might consider it deeply immoral that businesses should try and make a profit, but they're not going to be able to operate in any other way. Without making a profit, they won't be sustainable. So this is not to say they're not. My take on this is that they're going to look for where they can be cost effective and efficient, where they can maximize what they can get from their employees, what they can get from their suppliers, anything like that. They might look at their regulatory environment and move to a different place, a different city or country, and then take those jobs and wealth and capital with them. So we need to encourage them to stay here and employ more and more people, and you do that by relaxing regulations, easing taxes, less taxes, and then making it more we should appeal to their self-interest so that they stay in a particular country, in a particular city or country, or indeed province. We shouldn't think that one business in a sector, because they pay their employees a certain amount, which might be less, or might be less than the industry average, that they're exploiting them. Each industry has its own complexities, ins and outs, and so does every business. Every business is its own sort of entity in a way. It's the same as we say we want to treat individuals with respect, and that individuals are complex, that they have their own abilities, skills, characteristics. So too should we treat businesses. It's difficult enough for them to employ people, to grow, to make the business grow as much as possible without imposing even more regulations on them. As again, counterintuitive as that might be for some of us, we think if the government isn't involved, then people are going to be exploited. But I'd like you to always keep in mind that it is not up to us to decide what is exploitation for some and not for others. We've given, throughout South Africa's history, we've given the government way too much power to decide what is good for us or bad for us, and we've seen the results of that. When you give the government that sort of control and reach over people's lives, the group of people, of politicians who get into power and government, decide what is best for their group, and then also try and decide what is best for other groups, where they should live, with whom they should trade, what they should build, what they can own, all this sort of stuff. It opens the scope to government control and government abuse way too much, and we should always try and fight that sort of thing. We need to make sure that we hold government in check. No government should have that much control over our lives. If a particular business does something bad, for example, pays its employees to what those employees consider too little, in a free market they can move. But if a government has control over us and the government decides, X is bad for us, the government's going to ban that for everyone, and it's going to affect, the whole of society. So the damage that a business can cause is much more localized and internalized compared to the damage that a government can cause, especially when you allow that government to have a lot of power over you. So I think, it's coming from a place of perhaps wanting to protect workers, this concern about exploitation, but I think it's an assumption that we should always question. We should always ask, exploitation according to whom? What is the standard? What is, what are you comparing it to? These things are not in a vacuum. They're not decided on them by themselves. And we should try our best not to make emotionalist arguments when we read a headline, for example, that says workers paid this much, a CEO is paid this much, therefore it's exploitation. There is other stuff going on in the background that we need to be aware of, especially when it comes to running a business. And the more regulations there are in South Africa, which is the current trend, unfortunately, the more we're going to see businesses laying off workers. It's as simple as that. Because government's not creating an environment which is conducive to business growth and creation of jobs, despite what politicians might say. The words that they say are noble, and they talk about kind of creating jobs and all this sort of stuff, but their actions do not follow those words, unfortunately. So just something for you all that I thought I'd talk about this week. I'd like you to keep in mind this issue of exploitation and why I think it's problematic to have that sort of view. It's always good to question this sort of thing and just see what's underlying it, why are people saying it, and I'd hope that you all sort of keep that in mind when you read some articles and headlines and that sort of thing. Always consider that it's in the individual's power to engage with a business on his or her own merits, to decide for themselves what they want to work for, to decide if they don't want to work for a wage, if they do, if they want to learn a skill. All this sort of stuff to me is good and empowering, and comes with dignity and puts the control and the power in the hands of the worker and the employee. Otherwise, it becomes a case of a trade union or some body or organization or political party which thinks it has the best interests of the individual in mind, and then it acts with impunity and does what it likes. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all for joining me on this episode. Hopefully we can keep it back up. We can kick it back up to weekly episodes. I'll try and record another episode next week. I hope you all have a good week ahead and a good weekend, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.